Today, we are talking with Jen Liao, the co-founder and president of MìLà, which is a modern Chinese food brand redefining the frozen aisle. MìLà began as a beloved restaurant in Bellevue, Washington, serving up regional Chinese flavors. But when the pandemic hit, the team made a bold move, expanding from brick and mortar to frozen CPG. MìLà has evolved into a nationally recognized brand and is sold in thousands of retail doors. Since their shift during the pandemic, MìLà has rebranded, expanding its product line, and has raised over $30 million in venture-backed funding to fuel its growth. They've also brought on Simu Liu, the star behind the Marvel action movie Shang-Chi, as Chief Content Officer, signaling a clear vision to lead not just in product, but in storytelling and cultural relevance as well. In this episode, we'll unpack how MìLà has made the leap from restaurant to CPG, how they're scaling without sacrificing product integrity, and why celebrity partnerships and digital storytelling has become key growth levers. Jen, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me on the brand study.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm really excited for this episode. And to kick this off, I'd love to just get a description of the products that you're currently selling.
Yeah, so our main product that we have is a frozen soup dumpling. That's really what we started with. And then we've expanded into frozen pasta curd dumplings, and we also have a line of frozen Chinese noodles as well.
And hearing that it started as a restaurant is such an interesting story. I'd actually love to hear a little bit about that transition when you were running a restaurant and during the pandemic when MìLà became a brand.
We had opened our restaurant October 2018, and the idea of the restaurant was really centered around Chinese street food that we had grown up eating and really loved and couldn't find good versions of in the US. And when we started the restaurant, shouts to Jia, we really simply wanted to eat this food. That was really the entire goal. And as we had gone, we had to shut down at the beginning of COVID for a few weeks. So it actually wasn't too long. We were kind of a fast casual counter service place, so we were able to continue with takeout right after. During that time period, we started to experiment with the frozen soup dumplings as just a way, in case we weren't able to open again, whatever was happening, would this be a product that we could sell outside of the restaurant itself? And we just got started with that, a Google form, a PayPal link, and just started to send it to different groups on WeChat and on Facebook to see if they were interested in purchasing the item. And our main item at the restaurant was something called a Sinja bao, a pan-fried soup bao, and it's from Shanghai, and that was really what we focused on in the restaurant. So the soup dumpling is the cousin of that, and that's kind of what has been popularized in the United States. And so that's kind of why we started to experiment with the soup dumpling.
That is so interesting to hear, especially how you tested the market validation. So you used the Google form and the PayPal link, and that was beta testing essentially to see if people would be willing to buy soup dumplings online.
Yes, exactly. So we really made one batch, and one batch at the time, let's say, was 10 bags. And so we had made 10 bags of the frozen soup dumplings. Our chef was kind of doing it himself. And then we sent out the Google form just to see if anybody would want this item. And it got snapped up very quickly. So then we're like, okay, I guess we can make more of it. Brian, can you make a whole week's worth of it? We'll just keep sending out this form to different groups and see if there's interest. And as we started to do that, we also got referrals from the people that originally purchased from us, and they had told their friends about it. And it was spreading kind of organically through social media as well, which was really exciting. And then within 1 month, we actually had our first paid ad on Meta. So this was a time when all of the big advertisers had pulled off of all of the paid media platforms. And so it was really cheap for us to have paid ads at that time. And so we just started to test there to see, is this something that's local, and are people purchasing because they already know our restaurant and our name right in this community? Or is this something that even if they don't know who we are, this is an item of interest? And so we quickly found that it was just something that people really wanted, and we found product market fit pretty quickly.
Yeah, that is amazing. And I remember the early days of the pandemic and really craving that restaurant experience and that restaurant quality food. So it really sounds like there was a problem in the consumer and you were able to fill that need really quickly. And do you feel like having a restaurant really gave you that advantage to test it and then scale quickly?
Yes, exactly. So I think having some know-how in food definitely helped. I think it also was just where we started as a brand. So regardless of if we had a restaurant or not, the whole idea of the restaurant was we are going to do this in a very high quality, authentic way for the hero product at our restaurant. And so we carried that philosophy through when we started this company of everything that we're creating needs to be delicious, high quality, authentic, and we need to be delivering experiences that exceed expectations. And so that tenet really was at the core of the restaurant, and we continue to carry that through even when we entered kind of the D2C market. And that was just something that we've continued to adhere by.
Hearing that authenticity and top quality ingredients are core to Mila, I would say as a consumer of Mila that you all definitely hit that out of the park. So it's really so fun to also make, and it's such a different experience to have that at home and everyone can get involved and we make our own sauces. So it's so cool to hear that transition from restaurant to CPG. And I would love to hear a little bit about the brand and how Mila, the brand, came to life, because that's a different name than your restaurant.
Yes. So our restaurant name is Shaocije, and it meant street food avenue or street food eats. And so for us, really, that is where we started for the restaurant. I think street foods, it's a little bit harder to translate into CPG because there is that experience part of it of you're cooking it fresh, it's fried or it's grilled, and it has that component of eating that on a street together in the middle of the night. And that's just something very hard to capture and be able to replicate in someone's home. And so actually when we started with the soup dumplings and we looked at expanding into noodles, for example, we were already departing from street foods as the core product and the product pipeline that we would be pursuing. And so that was a natural point for us to think about, is this the right name for us? The restaurant name that we had, it was really like a localized restaurant for people in the community who knew exactly what they wanted. And when they went there, this is the type of food that they were getting. And when we started to expand in CPG and beyond, the street food product lineup, then we started to think about what is a name that better suits us as we are expanding our eating occasions, our usage, like our types of products, who is eating this. And so we wanted a name that really captured who we were. And we looked for a name that was both Chinese and, had English meaning as well, since we're Chinese American and we're third culture kids. And so we wanted something that was meaningful in both of these ways. So we actually had a very long journey in exploring what kind of name we could be taking on as our new name. I think it took several months and we came up with over 100 different options. And what we ended up with was Mila, which means honey and spice. And we actually had originally come up with this name. I was pregnant at the time. If we had a daughter, we wanted to name her Mila. And if we had a son, we weren't sure quite yet. And we ended up getting, the gender reveal was we were having a son. And so we thought, okay, this name that we came up for our daughter, the ethos behind it was that you could be spicy or sweet, somewhere in between, neither of these, be your own person. And we really liked that idea for what we were building as Mila, where we were kind of defining our own space, redefining what Chinese food could be in America, and wanted something that we could really own and felt good to us. And so I think the ethos behind the name for this person really also applied to the way that we were building the company. And so we decided to kind of use that for the company.
That is such a beautiful story, and it's such a great name. It's easy to remember, easy to say, and so many people, when I hear them, when I talk about Mila, they always come back and they're like, is this the brand Mila? It's something that people really latch onto. So I love to hear how personal that story was. And hearing a little bit about scaling and operation. So you were making these dumplings in the restaurant, and inherently it's kind of an artisanal product. There's a lot of labor, a lot of skills involved in making these products. How did you actually take this out of the restaurant and scale the operation?
Yeah, so I mean, from the start, actually, for the soup dumpling, we did have equipment that we had started with. And so really for us, it was around, okay, we have equipment, we have a single person operating this. I think the equipment itself, it's not, like one touch, set it and forget it. It's never like that. There's so many components to it where you're making lots of different decisions that result in a different type of product and soup dumpling for what we were making. So for the dough itself, how much dough, how much filling, that is a very explicit decision. For the dough, what's the makeup of the dough? How dense is it? How much moisture is there? What kind of flour are you using? Is it high enzyme, high protein? Is it bleached flour, unbleached flour, wheat flour? Like there's so many endless kind of choices in that. And then we were mixing the dough by hand in the very beginning. And then same with the filling where you have the actual meat itself. How are you deciding that? Is it a lean cut? Is it fatter cut? What kind of cut of pork is it? And then how much gelatin are you using? What kind of gelatin? Is it aspic? Is it gelatin from powder, from liquid? Like all of these things. And then you're mixing it by hand, of course. And then once you have the soup dumpling itself, they come out on the belt, but they come out lopsided. And so you fix it, you really fresh it up. And then when you're freezing it, we literally in the back of the restaurant at first, we were putting it just directly into an industrial freezer, but it's still pretty small freezer. And then when you have multiple racks, we learned about freezer horsepower and what could be handled from a single freezer. And there's heat that comes from the product that's freshly made. And so then the freezer itself couldn't cool it down fast enough. So we had to have a blast freezer, and we were literally just rotating trays around so that way it could freeze enough. And so I think when you talk about labor, that is really the labor that started with, even though you have a machine, like that is maybe 10 to 20% of the components of what is working. And so then as we're scaling each of these components, we're scaling and we're making it more consistent. So then we're bringing in, a dough mixer, a filling mixer, a meat like grinder, for example, hotel pans, a larger walk-in freezer. Like these are kind of the upgrades along the way, and they help you become more consistent and higher quality as you go. And so that was really the thing that we were paying attention to, was how do we not lose this more of like a crafted homemade feel, but maintain the consistency or improve the consistency and quality along the way.
That is amazing to hear that backstory about how much labor and all the decisions that you have to make this product. You eat this delicious item and you don't necessarily understand all the nuances, all the decisions that go into that. And that is so interesting. I'm assuming the R&D process is a little different today than it was when Mila first was starting.
Yes, exactly. So the R&D process in the very beginning was myself and Brian, our chef, who would just kind of ideate on things. We'd say, okay, here's a thing that we're interested in creating or replicating in some cases. How do we get a really good recipe? How do we hone the technique to be able to capture this in the right way? And it was really just like verbally talking about it. We test it on benchtop. We taste it. We're like, this is great. And now we have an R&D team of 4. And so then we have split teams we have culinary, and we also have more on the technical side where we have food scientists and we have commercialization. And so you're making sure that the components that you're bringing in are scalable and consistent as well. And so we have 2 different teams, and then we have sprint reviews. We're planning it ahead of time. And it used to be, we would say, okay, we should launch a new product. How fast can we get this done? When can we do it? Can we do it in 1 month? All right, let's just figure it out, put it out there and see how it goes. And that works when you have, 100 bags, 1,000 bags, and you're really distributing it locally, or you have a few different warehouses. And then we had grown to 6 different warehouses and a whole network of this. And then we had a website and all the ads around this, and we're growing larger and larger in scale. And so then the way that you have to plan for it, you have to ensure that each product that you put out there can stand alone and be successful in how you're marketing it as well. And so then the process to make sure that this is the right product also improves and increases in terms of the validation. So then we're sending it to beta testers. We're doing consumer surveys. We're looking at instructions and testing the instructions. And then as things come in, we're looking at the reviews. We're looking at the customer service tickets. We're looking at how people are responding to it. and then we're adjusting as we go. So it's less of like the actual food creation part has changed and more about everything around it becomes much more of a robust engine and process.
Yeah, that is so interesting to hear that process. Even when the product from an R&D perspective is ready to launch, there's still more testing, still more data collection to see how it performs in mass retail and how the integrity holds up on a mass retail perspective. That is so interesting to hear. And doing a quick research, you now have thousands of 5-star reviews. So it's clear that your systems and your attention to detail, it's clearly paying off. But I'd love to hear if there was any point where Mila maybe wasn't going to make it, or if there are any headwinds where you just didn't know you'd be able to make it through.
I think it's pretty constant. There's not really, I would say, single moments necessarily. I think this is a common thing that I've heard a lot of startup founders talk about. It's more of like a constant things that are happening. So you're basically rotating through every function and improving it or scaling it one at a time, and they all have to work in tandem. But you can't really do everything all at once. So you're rotating around and doing this for each thing. And so it could be that, for example, we started to expand our warehouses and we needed trucks to go to the warehouses. And then the time it took to ship there, and some of the trucks would break down. And you're like, okay, we have to go save the entire truckload of product. And this is our, month's worth of product. It's about to melt because the power broke down, because the truck broke down. It's the holiday time period. And you have to go rescue all of it, bring it back to the warehouse, dispatch it again in a couple of days. So those are kind of like the early days of things that would happen. And then as you go, then there are things like we are now on our second facility. So we moved from our first facility to the second facility, and we were running up against supply constraints and capacity for quite a long time. So in that switch, we really had very little downtime to be able to make it work. And so then in that switch over, our processes completely changed. So you're going from batched production into continuous production. And we didn't even have time to like rewrite all of the SOPs. And then all of the places you're walking, let's say like twice as far to go from one spot to the freezer and transfer. And like those all add up and they make a difference. And so it's really just like constant optimization to get it to the right place is more of how I would describe it. And I think there were big points where we weren't sure what the risk would look like. So the rebrand was a big one. So changing your name, changing your entire brand, like that is a really big risk to take on, especially for a small company. We did see early signs that it would be successful. So we went to Expo West and we revealed our new brand there. We didn't really even talk about it beforehand. And people came up to our booth and they're like, I think you're copying this brand that I've seen. I really love them. Why are you copying them? We're like, oh, that is us. So I'm glad that you somehow there's something that makes you feel like it's the same brand, even though it's a totally different name, different colors, but like we have some things that pull through to make you remind you of who we were. And so I think those signs were very promising. And within a month, we had actually seen, we were tracking Google search, for example, we had seen that for the new name, it already had outpaced our old name. And so we were able to recover pretty quickly. And that was a big risk for us, was like, it just would be very hard to transfer that brand equity over to the new name. So that was a really big relief for us. And then going into retail was another big risk, where for D2C, you really have such a big canvas online to tell your story, talk about the experience, talk about cooking, troubleshooting, everything around that. And on the retail shelf, it's just the bag. And so for us, we were like, do people know how to cook this? Do they have a steamer? Will it melt on the way home? We don't really, like we didn't come from CPG. We just hadn't studied behavior of consumers before, and whether they know that for frozen food, it's very sensitive and you need to keep it frozen. And how long does it take? So we were literally timing for us and all of our team members and their friends. We're like, can you time the time it takes from grocery to home? And like shop naturally, and we need to see how long your shopping trip is, and then we need to see when you're picking up your frozen item and does it stay frozen all the way home. And so like these are things that are very intuitive to people who have been in the industry, but it wasn't to us. So there were just lots of these unknowns.
So all those little nuances around will the product survive in retail, that is so interesting to hear. And it sounds like when you're working with CPG, it's kind of there's constant fires, things that you just can't predict. Like you mentioned, a truck breaks down. You can't plan for that. You just have to be able to react, scramble, make sure that product is saved, and then move on to the next. And that is so fascinating. And when you all got into retail, what was the driving factor that really got you into retail? And was that always an end goal for Mila?
When we first started, it's a figure of like there's 4% penetration of households for food bought online. So if 96% of households are purchasing in retail, like that's really where you have to go eventually. And I think we always knew that. It was more just how far could we go online? And is that a leading indicator for how successful it could be in retail? And could we use that to our advantage to translate some kind of brand equity and awareness into retail to drive intention of purchase there? So retail definitely was on our radar from the beginning. We just wanted to make sure that it was timed right. And I think online, this definitely helped us a lot because some of our first retailers that we moved into, like actually QFC, which is local to Seattle, and Wegmans, they were the first retailers that had reached out to us. They had seen our ads and they had purchased it, and then their chefs all really liked it. And that's what really gave us credibility to move into retail. So then they were asking for us to work with them to go in, and they like very patiently waited for us to be ready. And so then they acted as very good partners to us in terms of, hey, what does this product look like? What is the pricing? How do we position it? How many SKUs? What is the data? And so we were able to work well with them as partners going into things.
That is so fascinating. So similar to the Google form and PayPal link to test product market fit online, you almost used your online presence to test product market fit in a retail setting. That actually helped with exposure.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
That's so cool to hear. And in today's terms, what is the mix of revenue D2C versus retail?
Yeah, I would say last year it was about 50-50. And then this year it will be around 30 to 40% online D2C and then the rest retail.
Wow, that is amazing that D2C makes up that much of your business, considering it's only a 4% of market penetration of buying food online. That is so cool to see.
Yeah, exactly. So we're a year and a half into our journey of retail. So we're still quite early on in this. And we want to make sure that, we're bringing the right products, the right innovation, the right support to make sure that it can succeed in retail.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to focus on D2C for a second because it is so unique for a food company like yours to have such a successful D2C presence. What growth levers are you seeing be the most successful for D2C? Is it organic? Is it paid? I'd love to hear what strategies are working.
Yeah, so we actually couple our organic and paid strategy very closely together. So especially when we had first started doing this, a few years ago, on the organic side, we had opted for very native UGC feeling creative. And then whatever would work on organic, we would always try it over on paid. And it wasn't one for one, but a lot of the time it was an indicator that it could work really well on paid. And we really leaned into listening to customers. So we looked at customer reviews and comments and tickets, and we tried to answer questions that customers were asking us. Because that is, if it's a repeated question, it probably is likely that they're not the only ones thinking about it. And so we created a lot of content around this. So it would be cooking methodology, troubleshooting, equipment that you could use, recipes that you could pair with some of the items that were being purchased. And I think that really allowed for a little bit more natural speaking to our audience and what they cared about, especially as this was a new emerging category. And then we would take a lot of those clips over to paid. And it wasn't the same story where you're not talking about like, cooking troubleshooting. But I think the result of a lot of this is you get a lot of natural reactions to what you get as a result of the cooking process. So the first time you're opening the steamer and the first time you're taking a bite of that soup dumpling and you get that amazement of like, wow, this was frozen and this is the product that I'm getting. And so we took those and kind of put it into the paid format. And that was a lot of what was working for us. And then now we are pairing a lot more statics where you have beautiful food shots, for example, interesting backgrounds, along with this native feeling UGC.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And once again, using organic to test engagement, test interactions, and then the best performing organic, you bring it to paid. I love it. It sounds simple, but it's so much more difficult and strategic in the moment to actually have that system in place to ensure that your ROI and your ROAS on your paid ad are performing to as high as possible. And in today's terms, are you feeling that ads and paid media, do you feel like that supports retail growth as well?
Yes, it does. So I would say for D2C, we have historically treated this almost as its own business unit, and we don't really give any credit to any of the retail growth to D2C. So even just within itself, we're thinking about what audience is this hitting? Is it first order profitable and sustainable or not? How are you building this brand equity and awareness? And in the very beginning, when we had started, there weren't other frozen soup dumplings and we were not in retail. So there was no option. And so I think that was a very high kind of intent to purchase online. And then now, as us and other companies have expanded into retail, there's a lot more options there, especially for some of your basic flavors and products. And so it's just understanding how much is built up demand that you can direct over to retail. And that's a more natural purchasing place for them, especially for people who want to try this, try your brand for the first time, or even try the product for the first time. And maybe they haven't even had a soup dumpling. It's really hard to go all in on, 150 soup dumplings at one time without knowing what this is necessarily. And so then how do you connect this customer experience a little bit better? We're still on that journey of figuring out the right way to do that, but we definitely do see translation of, when you have a new product drop on D2C, people waiting for that to come and show up in retail, for example. So you do have some built-in demand going into retail.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And I would love to hear maybe any surprises with growth and marketing that didn't work, something that you really thought was going to be successful that ended up not working.
Not necessarily growth or marketing as a general strategy, and it's almost more product specific. So sometimes we will have products that we feel like this is really going to work, and it just doesn't. It doesn't speak to it, and it could be the product itself and interest in the product itself. It could be the way we executed on that. And what we have found sometimes is like we are obviously making products that feel authentic to us, but that's a very specific lens. And so how do we think about how other people perceive this product and how they are internalizing it? So for example, one thing that I've really enjoyed for Chinese cuisine is tomato and egg. It's a very comfort home style dish. You have tomato and egg over rice, and it is a little bit more of like a soupy texture, if that makes sense, or like a gravy texture, if that makes sense. And I asked someone else, like, hey, what would you think of a tomato and egg bun, for example? And they said, oh, I think it would be a quiche. And I was like, whoa, that is just so different than my mental model of what that product would be. And I was like, okay, I guess I could describe it to you as shakshuka. And they're like, oh, now I understand. Like, it's just everyone's point of reference is so different. And you can't just assume that it's like because you understand it, other people are going to understand it. This happened in another instance where we are testing a hot pot related thing. And when we had, like, for me, it's such an obvious flavor that makes sense to me. And when we had surveyed even our own team members, that in this case, we started with some Asian American team members. And when I asked them, they're like, I think of hot pot as savory and mushroom, or I think of tomato broth. And I was like, okay, yes, that makes sense. I do see those at hot pot places, but I never choose those. And so it was just obvious to me that hot pot meant spicy Sichuan hot pot. And it can be that specific, right? And so I think this point of view is something that we're always thinking about. How do we translate this? How do we communicate it to other people so that they understand the concept the same way that we understand the concept? And sometimes if a product doesn't work as well as we want it to, does that mean that this thing doesn't matter? Or does it mean they didn't understand it? Or does it mean that this just, even if they understood it and it mattered, this is just not the right product and people don't really like this product or flavor? So I think there are a lot of confounders when something like that happens.
Yeah, that is so interesting to hear. And really, you all are using food to essentially bridge cultures, to bring Chinese food into American households, which it's a multicultural landscape in America. A lot of different cultures are in America, a lot of different taste preferences. I'd love to hear how you actually balance honoring traditional, authentic Chinese food and then actually adapting it to the American consumer?
So it is interesting because I think, at least on the food itself, we have never compromised. And so this is more, I think we lean on how do we tell the story better? How do we market it better so that way people can embrace the foods that we enjoy? We just have this bar internally of, is this something that would exist on our kitchen table? If it wouldn't be on our kitchen table and we wouldn't accept it on our kitchen table, it does not leave this kitchen table and we would not distribute it to other people. And so I think that at the very least, it has to hit that bar for us. And I think there are trade-offs of like, is it too spicy? Is it too unique of a flavor? And I think instead of saying we're compromising and we're, dulling it down or gentrifying the food, it's more like you can decide to not put out that product if it feels like there isn't mass appeal for it. Or you can say it has a home. It just shouldn't live in every single retailer across the country. Maybe it should be in very specific specialty grocery stores where the audience understands these flavors, and there's other options at restaurants that they have consumed before and they can approach this and understand it. And it doesn't need to have, mass appeal and mass distribution. So I think that is kind of the way that we approach it a little bit, is like, what is the right product for which market? And not every market means mass market. And so then for the product itself, then how do we communicate it accurately so that the person getting it knows what they're getting and it hits their expectation? So here's an example of what you asked. We had actually formulated our spicy dandan noodles a long time ago, and it took us a year to formulate. And then we sent it out for beta testing. And we got a lot of people, even in Seattle, saying, what is this flavor? I don't understand it. It's making my mouth pucker. Can you remove the spice? Can I modulate the spice? And we're like, but removing the spice it's literally not a dandan noodle. Like, I don't even know how to conceptualize this as myself. And so that was an explicit point of compromise of like, do we modulate it? Do we remove the spice? Do we make it optional? And I think for us, we're like, I don't even know what this dish becomes. Like, we could say it's a sesame noodle. And it's not a dandan noodle. We don't have to call it a dandan noodle if that's the compromise that we want to make. But if we call it a dandan noodle, it needs to be a dandan noodle. And what we ended up doing was we actually delayed it a year for launch. And then we came up with 2 other noodles that were not spicy, that still felt authentic to us. So people had choice. Instead of saying, oh, because I've had your soup dumplings and I love it, I'm going to buy this item no matter what it is. And I don't understand it and I don't like it. So I think that sequencing of things is important.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear that authenticity really is the North Star for you all. And do you feel any sense of responsibility in shaping the US consumer preferences and that exposure to Chinese food?
Yes and no. Like, the authentic piece isn't saying we are doing only traditional foods. Like, that is definitely not what we are trying to go after or trying to capture. I think heritage and tradition, that's where we're rooted, and that's our jump off point. And sometimes we do traditional dishes, but then we're allowed to evolve beyond that. And so we're doing things that feel authentic to us and our team, and it reflects our point of view. So then responsible for shaping the palettes is, I think what we do feel responsible for is making sure it's a good experience no matter what. And I think that goes along with what I was saying of, this is the right product for the right market. And it could be a local market, it could be a large market, and you really have to understand that a little bit. And so we do feel responsible that we're putting out high quality, good food all the time. And so people who are new to the category or trying this flavor for the first time, they will like it, and they will say, oh, I want to try another flavor. I want to try another Chinese dish. I'm changing the way that I think about Chinese food, which largely is American Chinese food in the US. And I'm open to exploring this more. I think that's what we feel responsible for, is like, we're providing this experience so we can provide positive association, and they want to try more of these things, whether it's from us or other people. I think it's really hard to say that we want people to shape to what we think is a good flavor, because that's so personal to what we think. it should be.
And especially, I think when you bring it into the house and you share that experience in home and you're making it and you're sharing that with your friends and family, you really do have a different experience and a different relationship to the food when you're interacting with it and making it on your own. And I think you all do an amazing job of storytelling. You do so many education series about steamers and how to cook it and how to pair it with different flavors. And I'd actually love to hear about your strategy behind digital storytelling and actually how you've partnered with different celebrities to amplify that story. I saw online that you partnered with Simu Liu. He's an amazing actor, and that's such an amazing partnership. I'd love to hear how that partnership has formed and how he became the chief content officer for Mila.
Yes, so we were able to find someone who knew someone who knew someone to get him a package. And it actually ended up being that his parents had tasted our soup dumplings. And then when he came back from a business trip, they were gone. So he actually didn't try our product, but his parents had told him, this is really good. It's authentic. We approve. He's like, okay, I'll put in a small check as an angel investor. And we never had a direct interaction with him. And then after a year, I think the cards lined up where we were able to meet in person. And when we sat down, we really just started to talk about what we cared about for the culture more broadly and like for the business, what mattered and where it could go. And it wasn't necessarily so specific on like, oh, can we do a product collaboration? Or like, here's a piece of content that we could do together. It was a broader shared interest of like, how can we move things forward and progress it and be inclusive in storytell. And so right off the bat, that's kind of what set the tone for the partnership. And so we created this role and he's been working together with us. And some of it is structured where we'll say, okay, here's something that we want to get out there. Here's a message we want to talk about. How should we do that? And some of it is reactive of like, okay, here's a moment, like there's a lot of attention on this thing. How do we talk about it and address it? How do we like create content that people understand and is fun and is in the moment? And so there's a mix of both of these where we are brainstorming all the time what is appropriate in like a structured format and one that is more of like a fun, casual, reactive way.
That's so interesting to hear that story, how his mom was the one that really vetted the food and gave it the stamp of approval. That's so cool to hear. And has there been any learning curves or balance with working a celebrity like that who wasn't in the food industry prior and how you align on that brand story?
That's a good question. I think for Simu specifically, he has always cared about food. I think it would have been more difficult if this wasn't an area that or sector that he was interested in. So I think he also understood kind of what you mentioned, where food bridges cultures. And so it's a very powerful thing. And you can use it to like bring people to the table and talk about it. And it's an entry point to have conversations on other topics. And so that already was his starting view and point. And so that made it very easy, I think, to integrate that in. So I don't have a great answer to your question because I don't think it was too difficult. I think if it was somebody who wasn't familiar with it, then it would have been a lot harder. And I think that would have had to stay more at the level of like, we're just creating a piece of content that's fun together.
And when those stars align, you really do form that deep partnership where you have that mutually beneficial interactions and you can really feed off of each other's passions for creating stories and creating products and really getting stories out there that amplify the brand. And I've also seen that you all are working with a lot of social media influencers. So, not necessarily celebrities, but a similar question. How do you align on brand storytelling when you're working with these third party influencers?
I think there's a really big range. So I think we, for example, share our product with influencers generally in the space who do food content or do lifestyle content and they're interested in Chinese or Asian food, generally speaking. And I think we will naturally pull on threads. Like they tried it, they posted about it, they talked about it, and there was an interesting point of view. And we're like, you clearly naturally and organically like this. How do we make this a little bit of a deeper partnership? And then there are some people who they make very specific content where we want to pull on that like recipe content. And we're like, you do a lot of innovative, creative recipes. We want to give you your space and how you would interpret this. Like, that's what we're tapping into is someone else's point of view and not just ours over and over again. And so we give them a lot of space to be able to do that. We might give them a few talking points of what we see people generally curious about or generally responding to, and where we think maybe our differentiators are. And then we really let them explore that on their own.
Interesting. So there is some sort of vetting process where you see if there's a mutual understanding before a partnership is formed. I've heard so many stories working with influencers that sometimes you lose control of the brand story, or stories are getting out that are not necessarily aligned or supportive of the brand, even though there was a partnership. Have there been any challenges that you've had to overcome? Any lessons learned along the way?
I think we have had a couple of instances. I think it's all about expectation setting. And so I think like that's something that we learn along the way as well. So is the expectation right on the deliverable, the timing, the output, the revisions, how widespread you're going to make this or not make this, whether you're hitting the points that you want to or not. And so I think it's all around expectation alignment. And anytime that it hasn't been as smooth of a partnership, that's really the point of contention is like, I thought you wanted this, or I thought you needed this from either side. And I think it's just how do you react to that and respond to it.
That's really interesting to hear that perspective about how to align on story, make sure that's consistent. And sometimes there is difference of expectations. I'm a big believer that's when conflict arises, is when the expectations on either side are not met. And I would love to hear, so let's imagine 5 or 10 years from now, what would you like people to feel when they try a Mila product?
I think we would like them to feel, first of all, that you can tell there was intention and craft and quality that went into it, whether it is kind of your subjective personal preference for the product or not. I think we want people to feel that consistently, no matter what they are trying and tasting. And they can say, like, okay, I disagree with this point of view on what kind of flavor we're doing, but I respect that it's always consistent and you're always doing high quality. And for us, it is about accessibility. As I've said, we want a lot of people to try it. And so I don't want it to be where people feel like, oh, you're pricing it premium just because you can command that, or because it's good to price high. Like, I think for us, because our mission is for as many people to try it as possible, there are realities of like, we're a startup, we're not necessarily totally at scale yet. And so you do have to have premium pricing because you're not 100% efficient. And there's a lot of things that are going on right now for us to be able to commercialize and expand. But then we also are actively looking at when we can bring the price down, we're going to do that and not just arbitrarily hold a premium price, because we want more and more people to be able to try this and have it be an accessible thing and have it have sparked other points of view. And so I don't think we want to be in a position where it's like, oh, they're literally just doing the same thing as everyone else. They're not bringing a fresh perspective. I think for us, we want to keep pushing ourselves and see products that we want to eat out on the shelf. And so I think we want people, when they taste it, to kind of have that reflection.
I think it really all comes back to the authenticity and you and your team's perspective of bringing that authentic perspective out into the market. In this next question, I'm sure there's going to be some trade secrets, but are you able to shed a little bit of light on maybe what's next for Mila?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned, so the last year and a half we've been expanding in retail. And so that's a lot of our focus is continuing that expansion and bringing more and more product lines. And so I think for us, it is really stretching like, okay, here are some formats or some products that haven't necessarily been put out there quite yet, especially for CPG or a frozen product. And so we're going to test some of those and see if it works or not. And I think if it works and people are open to it, that really allows for a whole universe of where you can go with things. So we'll take some risks, I think, there.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. And it sounds like it also comes back to the goal of accessibility and expanding accessibility throughout the country and throughout different regions. And Jen, I'd love to be a little bit introspective and look back. If you could give yourself one piece of advice from what you know now to when you were starting Mila, do you have any advice that you'd give your past self?
That is a good question. I think these questions are always very hard for me to answer because I feel like any kind of struggles or any setbacks are always part of the journey, and it informs your point of view now. So if I didn't have those, then I wouldn't have the point of view that I have now. And so I think it's more just reinforcing the idea that the company is the team and it's the people, and making sure that you have the right people and you're setting up the right people for success, and you continue to invest in that. That really is the heart of everything that we're doing. And I think that dictates where the company will go as well. So just validating that continuously.
That was Jen Liao, the co-founder and president of Mila. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Make sure to click the follow button on your podcast app so you never miss a new episode. If you're looking for more practical takeaways to grow your brand, subscribe to the Brand Study newsletter. It's packed with exclusive content, deep brand analysis, and real-world insights you can actually use. Sign up today at thebrandstudy.co. I'm Conrad, and I'll see you next time.